I was 53 years old when my wife of 22 years looked me in the eye and told me she had been sleeping with my business partner for the better part of a year. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She sat across from me at our own kitchen table, the one we bought together at a Home Depot clearance sale back in 2003, the one where we'd helped our daughter Haley with her algebra homework and where our son Brody had eaten approximately 4,000 bowls of cereal. And she told me like she was reading a grocery list. "I've been seeing Donnie," she said. "It's serious. I think you deserve to know." Her name was Sandra. Sandra Louise Merritt, 49 years old, a dental hygienist at a practice on Route 12 in Clarksburg, West Virginia. We had met at a 4th of July cookout in 1999, when I was 31, and she was 27, and I thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. I proposed after 14 months. We were married in May of 2001 at a small church in her hometown of Bridgeport, with about 60 people in attendance, and a reception at the local Elks Lodge because that was what we could afford, and I had never once, not for a single day of those 22 years, thought about being anywhere else. Donnie was Donald Price, 54, my co-owner at Merritt Price HVAC Services, a heating and cooling company we had built together from absolutely nothing starting in 2008. Before that, we had both been technicians working for somebody else. We'd spent probably 15 years talking about going out on our own, and when the recession hit and our employer started laying people off, we finally did it. We each put in $40,000, money I had saved over years of overtime, money Sandra and I had argued about spending because it was a lot, and we started small. 2 vans, 2 guys, a website my nephew built for $300. By the time Sandra sat down at that kitchen table and dismantled my entire life, Merritt Price had 12 full-time employees, a fleet of 8 vehicles, and was grossing just under $2 million a year. Donnie had been in my wedding. He was the man I called when my father died in 2017. He had eaten Christmas dinner at my house more times than I could count. His wife, Teresa, had been friends with Sandra for years. They went to the same book club. I sat there and I did not say a single word for what felt like a very long time. Sandra told me she was sorry. She told me she still cared about me. She told me she hoped we could handle things like adults. Then she went upstairs and started packing a bag. Haley was 24 that year, working as an ultrasound technician at a hospital in Morgantown, about an hour from our house. Brody was 21, finishing up his junior year studying business at WVU. I did not call either of them that night. I sat in the living room until about 2 in the morning with the television on, and not a single thing going through my head that I could describe as a thought. It was more like static, like every channel on my brain went to fuzz at the same time. I called Haley the next morning. I tried to keep my voice even. I told her that her mother and I were separating and that she didn't need to worry. I was fine. I just wanted her to hear it from me first. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, are you actually fine? Or are you doing that thing where you say you're fine?" "Probably the second one," I said. She told me she was coming over after her shift. She showed up at 6:30 that evening with 2 bags of groceries and a look on her face that reminded me so much of her grandmother, my mother, that it almost knocked the wind out of me. She made pasta. She sat down across from me while I ate, and she asked me to tell her everything. Everything, I told her. About Donnie, about how long it had apparently been going on, about the business and what this might mean for the business, and about how I genuinely did not know what I was going to do next. She didn't say much while I talked. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, so we have 2 separate problems. We have the personal problem, which is going to hurt for a while, and we just have to accept that. And we have the business problem, which we need to think about strategically." I looked at her. She was 24. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn jaw, and she was sitting at my kitchen table, breaking my catastrophe down into actionable categories. "When did you get so practical?" I asked her. "I've always been practical, Dad. You just never needed me to be before." Brody called the next morning before I was even out of bed. He had talked to Haley. He said, "I'm not going to ask if you're okay because she already told me you're not. I'm just calling to say I'm in, whatever you need." I asked him what he meant by in. He said, "I don't know yet. But whatever it is, the business situation was more complicated than the personal one, in some ways, because it had a timeline attached to it. Donnie and I had a partnership agreement drawn up in 2008 with the help of a lawyer named Stuart Kellerman in Charleston. I called Stuart the week after Sandra left. He reminded me of the buy-sell clause, which essentially meant that if either partner wanted out, There was a formula for valuing the business, and the other partner had the right of first refusal to buy the departing partner out. Donnie had already called Stuart too. He wanted to dissolve the partnership. I want to be honest about what I felt when I found that out. It was not grief. It was not even really anger, not in the hot immediate way. It was something colder and more clarifying. I had spent 15 years building that company alongside a man who had spent the last year tearing apart my marriage, and now he wanted to take half the business value and walk away, presumably to go live some other version of his life with my wife. The valuation came in at just under $1.4 million. My half was approximately $680,000. The question was whether I could finance buying him out, or whether I'd have to accept a sale of the whole company to a third party and split the proceeds. I am not going to pretend that was an easy problem to solve. It wasn't. I spent about 3 weeks talking to my bank, to an SBA loan officer, to a business broker, to Stuart. In the end, I refinanced my house, took out an SBA loan, and pulled together enough to buy Donnie out at the agreed-upon valuation. He signed the paperwork on a Wednesday afternoon in Stuart's office. He didn't look at me the whole time. I watched his hand sign his name on the line that gave up his half of everything we had built together, and I thought about the first day we ever operated as a business, the two of us in a parking lot with 2 vans and a thermos of coffee, talking about what it was going to be like when we made it. I drove home and I sat in my driveway for about 20 minutes before I went inside. The divorce took about 8 months. West Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which meant that the court looked at what each of us had contributed and what was fair. Sandra's attorney pushed for a larger share of the business value, arguing that she had supported me through the years we were building it. My attorney argued that I had just taken on significant personal debt to maintain the business and that the home equity we'd had was largely consumed by that refinance. In the end, I paid Sandra a settlement that was painful but survivable. I kept the house. She moved into an apartment in Bridgeport, closer to her mother. I heard through mutual acquaintances, because in a small town you always hear things whether you want to or not, that Donnie had left Teresa shortly after he and Sandra got together, that Donnie and Sandra were living together in a rental house somewhere in Fairmont, that Teresa, who I had always liked and felt terrible for, had moved back to Ohio to be near her family. I did not spend a lot of time thinking about any of that. I had a company to run, and for the first time in 15 years, I was running it alone. Here is where I have to tell you about Brody. My son graduated from WVU in May, about 4 months after everything fell apart. He had majored in business with a concentration in operations management, which I had always thought was respectable but vague, the kind of degree you get when you're not sure what you actually want to do. What I did not fully understand until that year was that Brody had been paying attention. He had been paying attention to the HVAC company his whole life. He had come in on summer breaks and helped out in the office. He understood the scheduling software we used and the dispatching logic and the seasonal demand patterns. He had written a paper in one of his classes about small service businesses and customer retention, and he had used Merit Price as a semi-anonymous case study. About 6 weeks after graduation, he came to see me on a Saturday morning. He brought a folder. Inside the folder was a 40-page document that I can only describe as a business plan. Not a general business plan, a specific one, for taking what I already had and making it something different and bigger. He sat down across from me at that kitchen table, and he walked me through it. He had identified that the residential HVAC market in our region was getting competitive, and that margins were being squeezed, but that the commercial and light industrial service market was underserved. There were small manufacturing operations, office complexes, and medical buildings within a 90-mile radius that were paying for subcontracted HVAC maintenance at rates significantly higher than residential. He had made calls, not fake calls, actual calls to facilities managers posing as a student doing market research. He had the data. He proposed that we restructure the company over 18 months to target commercial contracts, add 2 specialized technicians with commercial certification, invest in some equipment upgrades, and rebrand. I read the whole document that Saturday. I did not say anything to him while I read it. When I finished, I looked up at him. He was watching me with that same expression he'd had since he was about 8 years old, the one where he was trying very hard to look calm, but his left knee was bouncing under the table. I said, "Your commission structure on the first year of any contract you bring in is aggressive." He said, "I know, but I'm going to bring them in." I said, "You'd be starting as a business development manager, not a partner. Equity comes later after you prove the model." He said, "That's fair." I said, and you're going to have to learn the actual mechanical side too, not just the business side. You can't sell what you don't understand, he said. I know. I want to. I hired my son in June of that year at a salary of $52,000, which was what I could afford and what he accepted without negotiation, which told me more about his confidence than any argument could have. Haley came in differently. She had not been looking to change careers. She loved her work as an ultrasound technician. She was good at it, and she found meaning in it, and I never once wanted her to do anything else. But in the fall of that year, about 7 months after Sandra left, Haley started asking me questions about the administrative side of the company. At the time, I had an office manager named Patty Shields, who had been with us since 2012 and who was excellent. But Patty was planning to retire in 18 months, and I had been quietly dreading the gap. Finding someone who understood the business deeply enough to manage billing, payroll, scheduling, and vendor relationships without a long ramp-up period was not going to be easy. What Haley told me, over the course of several conversations, was that she had been thinking about the stability question. She liked her job, but hospital employment had felt uncertain lately. There had been layoffs in her department, and she was watching colleagues she respected get let go for budget reasons that had nothing to do with performance. She was thinking about what a 5-year plan looked like. She was also, I think, thinking about me. I know she wouldn't say that. She'd deny it if I brought it up. But I saw it. I did not offer her a job. I want to be clear about that. What I did was tell her honestly what Patty's departure was going to leave behind, what skills the role required, and what I could afford to pay. I told her to think about it seriously and not make any decision based on wanting to help me out, because that was not a good foundation for a business relationship. She took 3 weeks. Then she called me and said she wanted to do it. She would give her hospital 6 weeks' notice, come in and shadow Patty for the full remaining time before the retirement, and take over at full responsibility. She was thorough about the transition in a way that made Patty emotional at the going-away lunch. By the time Haley was fully running the office side, I noticed things had gotten quieter, not slower, quieter. Problems that used to surface at the end of the month were being caught in the middle of the month. A billing dispute with a commercial account that would have taken me a week of back and forth took Haley 2 phone calls. She had a natural ease with people that made clients trust her and vendors deal straight with her. The commercial pivot Brody had mapped out took closer to 24 months instead of 18, which is how these things go. But by the time it was complete, we had 5 anchor commercial maintenance contracts, including one with a regional medical group that had 4 outpatient facilities and wanted a single vendor for all HVAC servicing. That contract alone was worth more annually than our entire residential division had been generating 2 years earlier. We hired 2 additional certified commercial technicians. We rebranded from Merit Price. I dropped Donnie's name without ceremony, just filed the paperwork and moved on to Summit Climate Services. Brody pushed for the rebrand. He said carrying a partnership name when there was no longer a partnership was confusing to clients and confusing to the market. He was right. The website got a real redesign, not a $300 job. Brody handled the vendor selection for that. Haley managed the client communication around the rebrand so that none of our existing accounts felt uncertain about continuity. Between the 2 of them, they handled it cleaner than I would have managed on my own. By the end of the second full fiscal year, under the new structure, Summit Climate Services posted revenue of just under $3 million. Our net margin was better than it had ever been at Merit Price, partly because commercial contracts are more predictable, and partly because Haley had renegotiated several supplier relationships and found inefficiencies I had genuinely not noticed. I remember sitting with the accountant, a woman named Roberta Fisk who had done my books for years, and looking at the year-end numbers. Roberta had been around since the early days. She knew exactly what Donnie had taken. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're doing better without him." I didn't have a good response for that. I just said, "Yeah." I extended equity to both Haley and Brody at the beginning of the 3rd year. Haley received 15%. Brody received 20%. The structure was designed so that the company could not be sold without all 3 of us in agreement, which was a provision I put in deliberately and which they both understood. Brody laughed when he read that clause. He said, "You don't trust people to leave." I said, "I trust you both. I just believe in paperwork." That was not entirely a joke. I need to tell you about the phone call I got on a Thursday afternoon in November, about 2.5 years after Sandra had sat at that kitchen table and told me about Donnie. It was Donnie. I almost didn't answer. I stared at his name on my phone for probably 4 full rings, and then I picked up because I'm the kind of person who picks up. He told me he had heard the company was doing well under the new name. He told me he was doing some independent contracting work, but things had been slow. He told me he had some contacts in the commercial sector, former customers from the Merit Price days, and he thought there might be a mutually beneficial conversation to be had about a consulting arrangement or maybe something more formal. He was careful about his language, very careful. He did not say the word partner. He said arrangement and beneficial and going forward. I let him finish. Then I said, Donnie, I don't think that's something I'm in a position to pursue. I wish you well. He started to say something else and I said, I genuinely wish you well. Take care of yourself. And I hung up. I sat there for a minute. Then I walked down the hall to the open plan office area where Brody was on a call with the facilities manager and Haley was reviewing invoices on her screen. Neither of them knew the call had happened. Neither of them needed to know. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched them work. My son with his father's stubbornness and his mother's charm. My daughter with her grandmother's practicality, and something all her own that I couldn't quite name but recognized as strength. We were not millionaires, in the storybook sense where you wake up one morning and there are commas in all the right places. What we were was a company valued by a business broker. Brody had insisted on a formal valuation at year 3, at approximately $2.3 million, with annual revenue growing at a rate that none of us had initially projected, and a client base that was stickier than anything I'd had in the Merit Price years, because Haley understood retention, and Brody understood acquisition, and I understood the actual work. My third of the equity was worth roughly $920,000 on paper. The kids' combined shares were worth more than I had paid Sandra in the divorce settlement, which was a number I had carried around like a stone in my chest for 2 years. The stone was gone. I should tell you what I know about Sandra and Donnie because people always want to know, and I think the honest answer is that I know less than you'd expect. I know they got married. I heard that from Haley, who heard it from a cousin. A small ceremony, apparently. No one from either family was particularly enthusiastic. I know that Donnie's independent contracting work was not going especially well, because he called me, which told me something. I know that Sandra reached out to Haley once, about 18 months after the divorce, and that Haley called me afterward and said, she wants to know if you're doing okay. And I asked Haley what she told her, and Haley said, I told her you were more than okay. I told her the truth. I don't carry bitterness about Sandra. I want to say that clearly, not because I think I'm supposed to say it, but because it's actually true. What happened, happened. I spent about 4 months in what I can only describe as a fog, and then the fog lifted and I had a company to run and 2 children who had chosen to show up, and I made a decision, somewhere in that 3rd or 4th month, that I was not going to let the worst year of my life define the next 20. What I will say is this. Sandra told me, in one of the last real conversations we had before the divorce was finalized, that she had always felt like I loved the business more than I loved her, that I was more present with work than with her, that Donnie made her feel seen. I have thought about that a lot. I don't think she was wrong, exactly. I think I was someone who expressed care through provision rather than presence, and I think that is a real limitation that cost me something I cannot get back. I am not sure Donnie actually made her feel seen in any durable way, but I understand the appeal of the feeling. I also think that none of that excuses what she did, and I have held both of those things at the same time for going on 3 years now, and I've found that it's possible to do that without one canceling out the other. Last fall, Brody brought in a commercial contract with a regional hotel group, 4 properties, all needing HVAC service agreements. It was the largest single contract in the company's history. He negotiated it himself over 11 weeks, mostly via email, and 1 in-person presentation at their corporate office in Pittsburgh that he drove to at 5 in the morning so he wouldn't be late. When he got the signed agreement, he did not make a big announcement. He walked into my office and put the folder on my desk and said, "Got it." I opened the folder. I read the numbers. I looked up at him. He was trying not to smile. I stood up and I shook his hand, which is not something fathers and sons usually do, but it felt right. He was not just my son in that moment. He was my business partner in the truest sense, the kind I had thought I already had once and turned out not to. "Good work," I said. "We're just getting started," he said. He was right about that. He usually is. I am writing this from the house I kept in the divorce. I refinished the deck last summer, something I had been putting off for years. Brody helped me one weekend and we worked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind. Haley came over that evening, and we grilled out and she brought her boyfriend, a quiet, steady guy named Phil who works in civil engineering and who treats my daughter the way she deserves to be treated, which is the only thing I really care about. I did not remark on how the kitchen table looked in the evening light. I did not say anything significant or summarizing. I just sat at that table with my two kids and Phil, and we ate and talked about nothing important, and I thought about what that table had witnessed and what it was witnessing now. And I thought that some things that break you also, in the breaking, reveal the shape of what was always underneath. I did not always know that my children were the best thing I had ever built. I thought the business was. I was wrong, and it took losing almost everything else to figure that out. But I figured it out, and we still have the business too.